Waiting for President-elect Donald Trump to say, "You're hired." His transition team, under fire for not being ready for prime time, pushes back hard. This is Special Report. Good evening. Welcome to Washington. I'm Brett Baer. It's been 8 days since Donald Trump was elected to be the 45th president of the United States. 1 week and 1 day. It took President-elect Obama nearly 3 weeks after Election Day in 2008 to announce his first cabinet choice. It took President-elect Ronald Reagan 5 weeks in 1980 and President-elect Carter 4 in 1976. But if you read the headlines and follow most news reports, the conventional wisdom is that President-elect Donald Trump and his team are not ready for prime time, are crawling along with their picks, and are involved in a presidential appointment knife fight behind the scenes. Tonight, the president-elect and his team are doing something very familiar from the campaign trail. They're ruffling feathers, defying convention, and pushing back against critics. Journalists and critics already in a lather are even more so over reporters being left behind for a family dinner last night at a famous Manhattan restaurant. Trump, meanwhile, insists things are going smoothly. Correspondent Doug McKelway is outside Trump Tower in New York to begin our coverage tonight. Good evening, Doug.
And Brad, a new name is now being talked about as a potential Treasury Secretary. He is CEO of J.P. Morgan Chase, Jamie Dimon. Our sister network, FBN, is reporting publicly now that Dimon says the Treasury job is, quote, not suited for him. But FBN reports there is a push for either Dimon or Steve Mnuchin, Trump's former campaign finance chairman, to accept the job. Dimon appears to have the edge, but that doesn't preclude other names from surfacing here, because remember, this is a two-way street. The president has to make the offer, and the potential candidate has to accept that potential offer. All this as the Trump team and the president-elect push hard to fight back against these accusations of a campaign in chaos.
There's a methodical approach to all this being put together. We're not going to rush to put names forward until we're absolutely sure. And we're going to make sure that there are people that we're confident are going to pass confirmation. And there are going to be people that we think that can implement the president-elect's vision.
President-elect Donald Trump defended the transition, too, with a tweet. Very organized process taking place as I decide on cabinet and many other positions. Back in Washington, Vice President-elect Mike Pence visited the transition headquarters and then stopped off at the Naval Observatory for lunch with Vice President Joe Biden. Once a virulent Trump critic, Biden toned it way down today.
They ran on a platform. They're going to try to move. I think there's a lot of things that were done where we can reach some accommodation. And look, it's a whole new world.
The steady stream of administration and cabinet candidates continued to file through the Trump Tower today. Now considered a possible pick for National Security Advisor is Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. The former Defense Intelligence Agency chief has been a rabid critic of Obama's foreign policy. Because the NSA position is not subject to Senate confirmation, his deeply social conservative views would bypass scrutiny by Senate Democrats.
The president-elect and I spoke last week.
In the running for Secretary of Defense is Arkansas Republican Senator Tom Cotton, who would bring a big mind and big experience to the job. The Harvard Law School graduate passed up a lucrative law career to serve as a platoon leader in Iraq. Fueling criticism over the transition team's process, the dismissal yesterday of Christie loyalist, former Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, Mike Rogers. Rogers was seen as a possible CIA director, but his absolving Secretary of State Hillary Clinton in the Intelligence Committee Benghazi report may have sealed his fate. An unlikely visitor to Trump Tower today was New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. In an hour-long meeting with Trump, he wants answers to what he should tell troubled New Yorkers about the next president and the huge cost the transition is causing New York.
The traffic situation is a very real problem, and it's magnified, of course, because we're going into the holidays.
This is all a part of the learning process for the soon-to-be Trump administration, and the criticism will not let up after Inauguration Day. Brett?
Doug McKelway outside Trump Tower. Doug, thank you. White House journalists are livid at Trump's exclusion of the media from a dinner excursion last night. Fox News media analyst and host of Fox's Media Buzz, Howard Kurtz, tells us tonight from New York The president-elect may already be starting a pattern of distancing himself from reporters. Good evening, Howie. You know, having been chief White House correspondent, having been in many press pools, I know the answer to this from the press point of view, but provide some perspective here. How big a deal is this that President-elect Trump ditched his press pool to go out to dinner last night?
Brett, good evening. I'm sure most people would say he's entitled to take his wife out for a steak at the 21 Club without having a bunch of pesky reporters follow him. And one pool reporter was reduced to going to a restaurant that Trump was rumored to be dining at, and then not being allowed to wait outside the 21 Club, and wrote the following. At 9:38 p.m., the pool peered around the dumpster and watched Ivanka Trump and her husband get into the SUV. But the larger issue that Trump needs to understand here is really important. A protective pool acts as a body watch, just in case something unfortunate happens to the next leader of the free world. Journalists also get to see who's coming and going, if he's interacting with voters, or if the motorcade gets into an accident. At the same time, President-elect Barack Obama ditched his press pool in Hawaii 8 years ago, and it wasn't treated as a national melodrama.
So I guess the question is, what if President Trump goes further in somehow restricting media access?
Well, that's the fear in the press corps, Brett, especially after candidate Trump didn't allow reporters on his plane, and they had to chase him around the country by flying commercial. Now, there is concern that a president who ran against the media might exclude journalists in other settings, important meetings, or even on foreign trips. Now, Trump hasn't said this, so it could turn out to be a blip as this lifelong businessman grows accustomed to the loss of privacy.
And you know, Howie, we haven't seen much of Donald Trump other than that 60-minute sit-down. So is it changing? I mean, what happened to the guy who loves to talk to the media all the time?
Exactly. I'm surprised the president-elect hasn't held a news conference as Barack Obama did 3 days after his election. And so he's allowed all this speculation to swirl around him about appointments and for a somewhat breathless narrative to take hold that the transition is in deep disarray. He could take that on rather than leaving it to his aides. Now, Trump has only appointed 2 people to the White House staff, so he may have his hands full trying to put a government together. He is certainly not going to be a press-shy president, Brett, but it's an odd time to cede the spotlight at a time when there are protests around the country and so much polarization surrounding his election. Brett?
Sure. Doing a lot of work behind the scenes, one would guess. Howie, thank you. After a few outings filled with respectful statements about the process and the smooth transition of power, President Obama is now stepping up his criticism of his soon-to-be successor. Chief Washington correspondent James Rosen reports from the White House tonight on an outgoing president who finds himself far from home in a tough political spot.
As President Obama on his final foreign tour beheld the Acropolis in Athens, birthplace of democracy, he also faced the prospect that last week's exercise of democracy back home may leave his legacy in ruins.
History does not move in a straight line.
Later, in an address to the Greek people, the president renewed his commitment to a smooth transition, but spoke in his toughest terms yet about the president-elect and the meaning of his victory.
You may have noticed the next American president and I could not be more different. Faced with this new reality where cultures clash, it's inevitable that some will seek a comfort in nationalism or tribe or ethnicity or sect.
These are the final days for Barack Obama, the winter of his presidency. With the Democratic Party he led in disarray, his legacy imperiled by Republican control of Congress and the White House, and the Supreme Court expected to shift sharply to the right, Mr. Obama must now navigate between conflicting duties to his nation and himself. As president, he stresses continuity to reassure allies abroad. As a political figure, he seeks to avoid blame for his party's defeat and to project confidence that his legacy is both laudable and lasting.
In addition to feeling it incumbent upon himself as the incumbent to have a smooth transfer of power, he's deeply disappointed and torn, not only about his legacy, but the possible risks to the country and to U.S. foreign policy for the future.
At Trump Tower, at least until now, aides to the president-elect had expressed gratitude for Mr. Obama's post-election tone.
You hear President Obama trying very earnestly to respect the will of the people.
But the remarks in Athens left some veterans of the transition process critical of the president.
He's being divisive in his rhetoric, and at the same time he's telling his White House staff to have a smooth transition. You can't have it both ways. His rhetoric has to match his deeds.
Compounding the complexity for President Obama is the fact that he, like much of the rest of the nation, has no firm idea of the precise policies the next president will pursue in foreign affairs, nor any idea of the specific means that Mr. Trump, the first person elected to the job without any experience in political office or the military, will use to advance them. Brett?
James Rosen, live on the North Lawn. James, thank you. One of the president-elect's early and perhaps biggest decisions will likely be on a Supreme Court nominee. There are plenty of names in the hopper. Tonight, Chief Legal Correspondent Shannon Bream goes down the list.
There is an existing vacancy, and then President Trump will fill it.
Though she once called President-elect Donald Trump a faker and said she could not imagine what the country would be like with him as president, Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg says she is looking forward to having the court back at a full complement of 9 justices.
Yes, because 8 is not a good number for a collegiate body.
Prior to his election, Mr. Trump took the unconventional step of releasing 21 names he'll consider for the seat left vacant by the death of Justice Antonin Scalia in February, and has repeatedly made this pledge.
Only from that list I'm going to pick. Only. We're not going outside that list.
The list was crafted with the help of the conservative Federalist Society. The group's executive vice president, Leonard Leo, met with Trump today.
I would say he's looking for someone that is independent, courageous, smart, very high quality.
Conservative court watchers are focused on Judge William Pryor, who sits on the 11th Circuit and was appointed by President George W. Bush. He faced a tough confirmation after initially being named to the bench by recess appointment. Democrats opposed Pryor's strong criticism of Roe v. Wade. And Judge Dianne Sykes, once a Wisconsin Supreme Court justice, was also a Bush 43 appointee. She has a growing profile within the conservative legal movement and once wrote an opinion affirming that firing ranges are protected under the Second Amendment. There's also the interesting possibility of Senator Mike Lee, the only non-judge on the list. His father once served as the Solicitor General before the nation's highest court, and Lee himself clerked for Justice Alito. While his team initially brushed aside the idea when his name was floated back in September, he has since congratulated Trump on his White House win and vowed to work with him to get conservative judges confirmed. There have been whispers about names not on the list, like former Solicitor General Paul Clement, Senator Kelly Ayotte, who just lost her re-election bid, and Senator Ted Cruz, who was seen at Trump headquarters Tuesday. But former Trump campaign manager Kellyanne Conway said this today.
He's committed to choosing from that list of 21.
Some on the left are urging President Obama to name his nominee, Judge Merrick Garland, to the Supreme Court via a recess appointment before the new Congress is sworn in January. It is a risky move legally and quite a long shot, but if it worked, Garland would be on the bench for nearly 2 years before the Senate would have to formally vote on his nomination. Brett.
We'll follow it. Shannon, thank you. Senators have selected their respective leadership teams. Republicans are maintaining a status quo, but Democrats will have a new starting lineup. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel is on Capitol Hill again tonight to tell us who's in. Good evening, Mike.
Brett, good evening. Newly elected Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer says his party needed a much stronger economic message. Schumer will take over in the new Congress as the Senate's minority leader after Harry Reid retires. He is also expanding the Democrat leadership team to what aides say is more ideologically and geographically diverse, including Vermont's Bernie Sanders, Wisconsin's Tammy Baldwin, and West Virginia's Joe Manchin. Schumer has already taken heat from the left, with 17 protesters arrested outside his office earlier this week for his ties to Wall Street. That might explain the need to add Sanders to leadership. And Schumer says it is important to have an economic message that connects with rural and white working class voters who overwhelmingly supported Donald Trump.
Now, there's a debate going on about whether we should be the party of the diverse Obama coalition or the blue-collar American in the heartland. Some think we need to make a choice and spend all of our energy focused on one group of Americans or another. I believe that there does not have to be a division.
In the House, Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi sent a letter to colleagues designed to scare off potential challengers, writing, quote, "As of this writing, I am pleased to report the support of more than 2/3 of the caucus. But an up-and-coming Ohio lawmaker sounds intrigued by taking on that fight."
We can't ever be a majority party if we just win New York and California. We have to win these Midwestern Great Lakes states, and we need 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 members of Congress from each of those states, and we got to talk about these lunch bucket issues.
The Senate Republican leadership is the same with Mitch McConnell, the majority leader. The only difference will be Colorado's Cory Gardner heading the National Republican Senatorial Committee, or NRSC. McConnell told reporters 2016 wasn't the first tough election.
American campaigns are pretty spirited, pretty robust. What's different is with the internet and 24-hour TV, everybody gets a constant they're constantly confronted with all this. Look, I think it's time for the election to be over.
No surprise, Leader McConnell did not want to discuss his conversations with the Trump team. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. Health officials in the South are warning residents about dangerous breathing conditions resulting from wildfires that have scorched 128,000 acres of parched land. Correspondent Jonathan Seri is live in the North Georgia mountains, where the smoke has been pretty thick at times. Hello, Jonathan.
Hi, Brett. You can definitely feel the smoke in your throat and in your eyes. There are currently 37 large fires burning throughout the region, one of them just 7 to 8 miles from where I'm standing. And in some places, firefighters can expect to continue battling the flames through mid-December. Dozens of wildfires continue to burn across 7 southern states, parched by weeks of drought. The fall leaves that normally draw tourists to the mountains this time of year, making the fight to stop the flames all the more difficult.
We can put in a hand line and a line that's going to stop the fire, but instead of leaving that like we normally would, say in the West, because it's secured, we got to leave somebody there to patrol it, because leaves are constantly coming down, and that fuel bed is now covering our line, and then there's a fuel source to get across to the other side.
My wife and I just put our heart and soul into this place for the last 40 years.
Bill and Jerry McCanich are among dozens of Buncombe County, North Carolina residents heeding a voluntary evacuation notice from firefighters.
We know that they're doing a good job and they haven't lost any structures yet. We certainly hope they can say that when the fire's over.
Although the fires have yet to reach heavily populated areas, smoke is affecting air quality in major cities as far away as Charlotte and Atlanta. Hospitals have reported an increase in patients seeking treatment for respiratory problems, although it's unknown how many cases are directly related to the fires. In small towns, churches and individuals are collecting donated supplies for firefighters.
Anything we've asked for, even if we've just briefly expressed the need, they've been lined up at the door, making sure we have food and water and drinks.
But firefighters are getting no breaks from nature. Forecasters are predicting a cold front to move through the region over the weekend, bringing more dry weather and heavy winds, and that could further spread the flames. Brett?
Jonathan Seri live in the North Georgia mountains. Jonathan, thank you. President Obama's Interior Secretary is canceling 15 oil and gas leases near Glacier National Park on land considered to be sacred to the Blackfoot tribes of the U.S. and Canada. No drilling has occurred in that area, and the cancellation was made in cooperation with the company that holds the leases. The move preserves the 130,000-acre Badger II Medicine area within the Lewis and Clark National Forest. A mixed day for the markets today. The Dow lost 55. The S&P 500 was down 3. The Nasdaq gained 19. Up next, will President Trump put the financial squeeze on sanctuary cities? First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates around the country are covering tonight. Fox 9 in the Twin Cities with a second-degree manslaughter charge against a police officer who shot and killed a black motorist in suburban St. Paul in July. A Minnesota prosecutor says the officer had no good reason to use deadly force against Philando Castile last July during a traffic stop. Fox 35 in Orlando as 2 trains loaded with coal and phosphate rock collide this morning, derailing and sending at least 20 cars tumbling over. 2 people sustained minor injuries. And this is a live look at Oklahoma City from our affiliate Fox 25. One of the big stories there tonight, a federal appeals court has upheld the dismissal of a lawsuit filed by the brother of an Oklahoma death row inmate whose botched execution led to a moratorium while the state reconsidered its lethal injection protocols. Gary Lockett had sued over the 2014 execution of his brother Clayton Lockett. It took 43 minutes for the convicted murderer to die after the lethal injection procedure started. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. Since several so-called sanctuary cities are being pretty bold in vowing to continue their policies, whether President-elect Donald Trump likes it or not. But Chief Correspondent Jonathan Hunt tells us tonight Trump has what he might call big-time leverage.
We have to be seen as a protector and not a deporter.
LA Police Chief Charlie Beck says President-elect Trump's plan to deport millions of illegal immigrants is misguided and impractical for a city like Los Angeles, home to some 500,000 illegal immigrants. Chief Beck says he needs the help of those illegals and their trust to fight crime.
I need them to work with their local police stations. I need them to be witnesses to violent crime. I need them to be part of the fabric of Los Angeles if we're going to keep this city safe. And for a local law enforcement agency to take on the role of immigration enforcement tears that fabric apart.
City leaders across the country are echoing those comments, from Washington, D.C. to Denver to San Francisco and many more. Chicago's Democratic Mayor Rahm Emanuel was one of the first to reiterate his city's sanctuary status.
You are safe in Chicago. You are secure in Chicago, and you are supported in Chicago.
Trump ally Newt Gingrich was infuriated by Emanuel's comments.
President-elect Trump is talking about a very focused effort to get rid of people who are criminals. Now, you would think that the mayor of Chicago, in the middle of the worst murder pattern in the city's history, would be thrilled to have somebody help him get rid of criminals. This is madness.
There is no legal definition of a sanctuary city, and legally speaking, the federal government cannot force local law enforcement officials to check anyone's immigration status. But Trump has previously suggested millions of dollars in federal funding could be withheld from cities that don't cooperate.
This would actually be a relatively efficient way for him to capture the assistance of local governments. I mean, most local governments would jump through hoops of fire to receive block grants from the feds.
But here in LA, Police Chief Charlie Beck doesn't seem to care much about the threat of losing federal dollars. It's not just about the money, he says. It's about, as he puts it, doing the right thing. Brett?
Jonathan, thank you. Students at colleges and universities are staging walkouts today over the Trump election in general and his immigration policy in particular. This was the scene at Columbia University in New York. Students want schools to be designated safe zones for illegal immigrants. Dozens of Border Patrol agents are heading to the Rio Grande area of Texas to deal with a surge in illegal immigration across the border. Correspondent Casey Stiegel looks at what's prompting this latest run for the border.
Illegal activity along the southwest border is skyrocketing. That, according to new data from U.S. Customs and Border Protection, which shows a nearly 90% increase over last year in the number of family units and children coming into America illegally.
We're being pulled in two different directions. One, secure the border like we're supposed to, and the other is handle women and children.
One of the reasons behind the decision to deploy an extra 150 Border Patrol agents to South Texas, where more than 2/3 of the apprehensions take place. It's a 2-month assignment for the agents who are coming in from California and Arizona. The reason behind this surge is up for debate. Some believe it's largely because of President-elect Donald Trump's tough stance on immigration.
They're mobilizing because they don't know what tomorrow will bring, but they know that today they can cross.
Others attribute the spike to cartel violence in countries like Guatemala and Honduras, which has forced many to flee and show up in America for help.
I feel safe because I know my mom is here now, and I'm going to be able to continue my studies.
Andrea says her husband was kidnapped in El Salvador, so she left with her 2-month-old baby in tow. She says she paid smugglers about $8,000, and it took roughly 2 weeks to make the trek.
I want the people to know that it's not an easy trip. They really need to think about it. There's a lot of dangers. People can lose their life, and there's lots to be lost along the way.
Dangers the feds hope serve as a deterrent. CBP is now running these public service announcements throughout Central America and Mexico, warning of the ramifications for those who attempt to come in. Immigration advocates say this is a humanitarian crisis and it is not politically motivated, pointing to the border surge of 2014. Brett?
Casey Stiegel in Dallas. Casey, thank you. Russia is withdrawing from the International Criminal Court. The panel rules on grave charges such as genocide and crimes against humanity. Russian President Vladimir Putin's action comes just a day after the UN's Human Rights Committee approved a resolution condemning Russia's occupation of Crimea. Putin says since Russia never ratified the court treaty, today's move is just a formality. A suicide bomber on a motorbike killed 6 people in Kabul, Afghanistan today. An Afghan security official says the bomber deliberately targeted a minibus holding security agents working for the government. 2 members of that agency were killed along with 4 civilians. The ISIS affiliate in Afghanistan is claiming responsibility. This bombing follows a bombing inside an American airbase in Afghanistan that left 4 Americans dead last weekend. Tonight, a top intelligence official is speaking out, saying aloud what intel officials put out via press release during the election, that a foreign government tried to and eventually did interfere with the U.S. election. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Harridge has specifics.
Wikileaks. Speaking at a Wall Street Journal forum, the NSA director said for the first time publicly Russia was behind the hacks that were deliberate and designed to influence the election.
This was not something that was done by chance. This was not a target that was selected purely arbitrarily. This was a conscious effort by a nation state to attempt to achieve a specific effect.
Admiral Michael Rogers didn't need to mention Russia by name because in early October, the Director of National Intelligence, James Clapper, made that point clear. The U.S. intelligence community is confident, Clapper said in a written statement, that the Russian government directed the recent compromises of emails from U.S. persons and institutions, including from U.S. political organizations. But Rogers' public statement went a long way to strengthening Hillary Clinton's claims about the 55,000 leaked campaign emails.
We've never had a foreign government trying to interfere in our election. We have 17 intelligence agencies, civilian and military, who have all concluded that these espionage attacks, these cyber attacks, come from the highest levels of the Kremlin.
Government investigators have uncovered more evidence that Russian-backed cyber militias who hack systems to curry favor with President Vladimir Putin used a unique computer code to break into systems undetected.
It had the signatures of the more prolific hacker groups that are operating as cyber militias on behalf of Putin.
Vice President Joe Biden recently told NBC that Putin should expect payback.
He'll know it, and it'll be at the time of our choosing and under the circumstances that have the greatest impact.
Cyber experts said retaliation could include booby-trapping U.S. networks to snare hackers as they steal data, or direct attacks on Russian networks. And with Clinton's defeat, the hacking threat is more severe.
They are very much emboldened to go further. What is most concerning to me is they've already colonized wide swaths of U.S. infrastructure, and they're attacking us from within.
A proportional response is advocated by current and former intelligence officials, with the caveat that an undue delay will be perceived by the Russians and the hackers as a sign of American weakness. Brett?
Catherine, thank you. The suspect in September's bombings in New Jersey and New York has been indicted. 28-year-old Ahmad Khan Rahimi is facing 8 counts, including detonation of a device in Manhattan's Chelsea neighborhood that injured 30 people. A pipe bomb also blew up along a Marine Corps charity race in Seaside Park, New Jersey. Rahimi's lawyer has said his client will plead not guilty. Noticeably absent in the indictment paperwork, no mention of ISIS, despite the writings of the suspect that directly referenced ISIS leaders. The idea of robots who can kill humans on their own has been a science fiction staple for decades. Think Terminator. But now, there are a lot of educated people who say it's not just fantasy anymore. Tonight, Pentagon producer Lucas Tomlinson looks into how the Department of Defense is involved.
Robots acting on their own, hunting down humans and killing them. What's only been seen in Hollywood could soon be coming to a battlefield near you. the Pentagon investing billions of dollars to develop autonomous weapons, machines that could one day kill on their own. And now, the big question, how much independence to give them.
We're convinced that fully autonomous weapons, perhaps better known as killer robots, would pose grave dangers to civilians, and for that matter, to soldiers. We think that they cross a fundamental ethical line by turning life and death decision-making over to machines.
Over 30 countries already possess defensive weapons which use autonomy to shoot down incoming missiles or aircraft. But the Pentagon insists humans will decide when to strike.
When it comes to the use of force on behalf of the American people, there always needs to be a human being involved in making those decisions.
But critics don't want to take any chances.
We think that they should be preemptively banned. They don't exist yet, but they're coming down the pike very rapidly.
In 2003, a U.S. Army Patriot missile battery, a system which incorporates a high degree of autonomy, shot down 2 friendly aircraft, killing the pilots.
I don't think we should ever expect war to be perfect and pristine. There's going to be incomplete information. There's going to be accidents. There may be ways in which automation can make warfare more precise, and we've already seen that with smart weapons.
Sherry says autonomy could reduce civilian casualties on the battlefield if used the right way. Experts say the Pentagon is only interested in using the technology for logistics operations or other tasks such as refueling aircraft. Others see the value in unmanned submersibles like this ghost swimmer, a potential underwater drone. Today, automation is being used for driverless cars and on Wall Street, but it's not perfect.
When you look at, say, stock trading today, it's highly automated, and there have been situations where these algorithms that companies have, they interact in unexpected ways, and you get something like a flash crash. And I don't think you'd want to see the military equivalent of that, a flash war.
Top Pentagon officials say the U.S. must stay ahead in the robot arms race. Nations like Russia and China are trying to develop the technology to close the gap. The United States won the Cold War in part due to its innovation prowess, something it hopes to maintain. Brett?
Lucas Tomlinson live at the Pentagon. Lucas, thank you. Melvin Laird, the former Wisconsin congressman who served as President Nixon's Secretary of Defense during America's withdrawal from Vietnam, has died. At the Pentagon, Laird coined the term Vietnamization to describe the effort to get South Vietnam to assume responsibility for its own defense against the communist regime in the North.
Democracy depends on a peaceful transition of power, especially when you don't get the results you want.
Just a hive of buzz and activity. If anything, he has obviously more choices than one to fill in each position. So we have an embarrassment of riches when it comes to many of those different positions.
No administration is ready on day one. We weren't ready on day one. I've never met one that's ever been ready on day one. But I'm confident on day one, everything will be in good hands and they'll be handled anything that can come before.
It's very calm, it's very structured, and anyone saying anything else is either A, bitter because they're not on the inside and not being considered.
Well, some reaction there to all the coverage about how this transition is going. If you read the New York Times today, the headline, "Firings and Discord Put Trump Transition Team in a State of Disarray." The president-elect tweeting out last night, "Very organized process taking place as I decide on cabinet and many other positions. I am the only one who knows who the finalists are." Continuing this morning, the failing New York Times story is so totally wrong on transition. It's going so smoothly. Also, I have spoken to many foreign leaders, and they put out a long list of foreign leaders who have spoken to the president-elect and the vice president-elect today. If you take a look at the presidential campaign announcements, in the cabinet announcements from previous presidents, you can kind of follow this chart. And this is the number of weeks you see on the left, week 1, 2, 3. President Obama, nearly 3 weeks before he made an announcement to his cabinet in 2008. There you see Bush 43, who obviously had a unique situation in the recount in 2000. But Reagan was in week 6 when he made his first announcement, and President Carter in 1976, week 5, before he made an announcement. Again, it's been 1 week and 1 day. Let's bring in our panel. A.B. Stoddard, Associate Editor at Real Clear Politics, Editor-in-Chief of LifeZette, Laura Ingraham, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Well, before we start, Laura, you are on this list of possibles.
Oh, I am? Gosh, I'm going to check my papers.
How is that? Have you been talked to? What's the deal?
Well, you know, we're going to have a conversation about it, and it's nice to be mentioned, as it always is, but you know, I love what I do. here at Fox, and I love my radio show, and I love Life's Set. So it would be a big life change for me in a different role. I worked in the White House before in the Reagan years as a junior speechwriter in domestic policy, and at a few other departments with Bill Bennett, and at the Department of Transportation. So I have some very junior experience. But it would be a great honor to do something that I thought I could contribute to significantly.
Well, I wanted to talk about that first. Charles, your take on all this and how it's being covered.
I think the coverage is slightly over the top, in fact. It's remarkably over the top. First of all, as you showed in that chart, historically there's nothing unusual about not having made an announcement after 1 week and 1 day. Second, the Trump campaign has been described as in disarray since about January, and he won the election. A third, I don't think there's any question that if we come to Inauguration Day and we don't have, say, a Secretary of Commerce nominated, the foundations of the Republic will not be threatened. So I think this is sort of a tempest in a teapot, and now I think Trump is approaching the most delicate stage of the selection process, the swimsuit competition.
AV.
Well, I agree. I think that this is drinking water through a fire hose. It's not easy. It's totally overwhelming, and it's complex, and they do not have to wrap this up right away. And they have a lot of time, and I think people need to give them a break. It's very new. He'll talk to all those foreign leaders when he needs to. They don't need to all be the third caller. And everyone will get taken care of. I think the concerns really are about the kind of transition work with the current administration at the Department of State and the Pentagon, that if they haven't heard from them, and there's all these squabbles going on between what is sort of the Republican establishment intelligence community that was, very much opposed to Donald Trump, and now is being urged to come on board and help him. What the voters want to hear is that as we enter a very fragile time, because the transition is when we're the most vulnerable, not only these months, but from January to say June, a new and young administration. I think they need to reassure people that they're going to be able to hire the best people, and a loyalty pledge will not be the only test, and that they're going to, and I would urge all those people, if they're patriots, to come on board and help fill out a robust national security team, no matter what. And I think that the arrangement with his kids is of a very big concern to people, because when they throw around the term blind trust, they're not talking about what a real blind trust is.
Okay, Laura?
I think there's not all that much to report for the press right now, and so there's a lot of time to fill on 24-hour news, and there's a lot of newspaper articles to write, and so the speculation is just all over the place. And I mean, I'm getting calls from people throwing out names. I'm like, I've never even heard that, so I don't know what you're talking about. So I understand it. It's frustrating. There's a bit of a emptiness in the news, perhaps, for people after this campaign that was so tumultuous and so surprising. But I think people should take a bit of a breath and let this play out a little before they jump to all these conclusions about what Trump is looking at or not looking at. It seems to me they're talking to a lot of people, and isn't that good? Isn't that what we want them to do, and have a breadth of advisors from all walks of life, which from what I can gather they're really doing. And it's not just Trump loyalists, it's people with business experience and different types of political experience. And I think that's a healthy thing. But the idea that it's all going to be wrapped up in 10 days, that's just not realistic.
Yeah. Well, in the risk of speculating, here's us speculating. Some lists that we're told are being talked about. Secretary of State Rudy Giuliani, he is pushing for it, we're told, but we don't know if there's decision made on that, or whether this is the problems that you've seen reported about his ties on money is going to be a problem for him overseas. John Bolton, Bob Corker, and even David Petraeus' name has been talked about. Defense Secretary, we're hearing Jeff Sessions, who again is another person who on this team went early into the campaign and is said to have his pick for the most part. Senator Tom Cotton from Arkansas, outgoing Senator Kelly Ayotte, and even General Jack Keane has been talked about. Treasury Secretary, this is very interesting. Stephen Mnuchin, Wilbur Ross, Jamie Dimon was talked about a week ago, again surfaced again today, and Congressman Jeb Hensarling. Charles, let's just stop there for a second. I mean, you have two Wall Street people definitively in there. Does that fit in a Treasury Secretary position for a Trump administration?
Well, Trump said when he was campaigning that he wants the best minds, the most experienced. He spoke, for example, of Carl Icahn to be the negotiator with China. I think he'd be justified in picking someone. They'd say establishment, they'd say from international banking, but I don't think anyone really cares. Can they deliver? Do they know what they're doing? Will they send some reassurance to the markets? In the same way on the national security post, the ones you showed, you know, Trump is a novice. He's coming in from the outside. I think the one thing he might want to think about is reassurance. And somebody like a Jack Keane in defense, or a Petraeus, somebody who's got a track record and is not identified with an ideological camp, I think might be a pretty good choice and would reassure allies and also people in the military.
But it doesn't fit a lot of areas of Trump foreign policy.
Well, I think that the candidates for these jobs are going to have to advance Trump's worldview, and the worldview that Trump really laid out in the campaign was, we're going to have a very robust foreign policy, but it's going to be more pragmatic. Given our current financial situation, we have to rebuild the American economy. We're not going to be the world's policeman, but we're going to live up to our obligations. I mean, I know people that think, well, he's just going to abandon everything. I never got that from what Trump said. So whoever is in that position at defense is going to have to be more in line with, I think, more Reagan-esque than George W. Bush in foreign policy. If they're more George W. Bush, I don't think it's going to work.
Maybe quickly, we're talking about this outsider status, also hearing that there's talks about the inauguration and maybe not having inaugural balls and having more kind of a populist theme, that we don't need that. You have the swearing in, and it's kind of like Jimmy Carter's thing. It's a little Spartan.
Look, I think it's great that Trump says he's not going to take a paycheck, that he wants to do the inaugural different. I mean, I think that those kind of rules are made to be broken. And I think him, working as a volunteer president is a great thing. I think there are just some other rules that people don't want to be broken, like the press pool that travels with him and is supposed to be, provide protective reporting coverage no matter where he is. There are just some rules that people are going to be uncomfortable with if they are broken. And particularly in the case of Secretary of State, which I also read today, Nikki Haley is in the running for. It's great that they're looking at everybody. Rudy Giuliani will come under, it seems, and maybe he'll be cleared of this, the same criticism that Hillary Clinton did, the same baggage she carried to the State Department that Donald Trump campaigned against. And I don't think he wants to start off with a bunch of swampy characters when he really wants to drain the swamp.
Next up, President-elect Donald Trump, immigration and sanctuary cities.
This city and so many cities around the country will do all we can to protect our residents and to make sure that families are not torn apart.
We have to be seen as a protector and not a deporter.
To be clear about what Chicago is, it always will be a sanctuary city.
President-elect Trump is talking about a very focused effort to get rid of people who are criminals. Now, you would think that the mayor of Chicago, in the middle of the worst murder pattern in the city's history, would be thrilled to have somebody help him get rid of criminals. This is madness.
Well, take a look at this map. There are more than a dozen U.S. cities which have already vowed to protect illegal immigrants' rights despite Trump's election. And there you have it. Donald Trump on the campaign trail talked about holding back federal funding from these cities if they do that. AB.
Well, the actual holding back of federal funding is a little complicated. There is a rule that they are in violation of, but it's a little murky. The point is this. There will be some immigration reforms coming, some immigration and security reforms. There will be a package of issues, a fence, a wall, a combination of lots of different things that the Congress is going to push. The Democrats have to make up their minds. Are they going to work with the Republicans on any of them? And do they want their liberal urban mayors going to war against this new administration in defiance of the federal government and praising and protecting sanctuary cities? I think that's probably not a wise choice, and they're going to have to make a decision as they they try to rebuild the party in their many years in the wilderness.
It is stark, Laura, to see Rahm Emanuel saying you will be safe in Chicago. I mean, there are a lot of people who don't feel safe in Chicago, but he's saying illegal immigrants will be safe in Chicago.
I bet there are a lot of people in Chicago who are at the poverty level right now, poverty line, who would like more of those resources put into Chicago schools or in local policing, rather than indulge the liberal impulse to welcome anyone who wants to walk across the border. What's happening now at the border is a shock to most Americans. When they see the video, and Fox did a great report on this tonight, they see the video. It's a mass of humanity right now, just walking across the border, coming across the Rio Grande. This is a peacetime invasion of the United States. And I understand there are a lot of people who are desperate. I get that. But I think this election demonstrated that people don't think it's racist to believe a border should exist and be enforced. And that's where the Democrats always overstep it. It's not racist to say we should have an enforced border. Right now, you cross the border, you get an ankle bracelet slapped on your ankle, and then you're released. That's not border enforcement.
And basically, there's a deadline now, or a perceived deadline.
But sanctuary cities were a scandal before Trump. There's a defiance of federal authority. Federal authority is legitimate. The people who did this in the past were the racists in the South who defied federal authority on civil rights. So now it's in the name of something that appears to be humanitarian. But it should be. It's something that should not be allowed. The Democrats have tolerated it. And I think Trump would be within his rights to withhold funds, and he should. And the Democrats are making a big bet, and a mistaken one, if they decide they're going to defy the federal government and what seems to be common sense, control your borders.
As the Democratic Party tries to find out a way forward in the next election. That is it for the panel, but we'll take a look at some interesting reporting from the streets. Finally tonight, following all the news tidbits throughout this transition time can be really tough. But there are some you can probably discount from the beginning for being too far-fetched. As one late-night show found out, that's not always the case.
We're talking to people today about Donald Trump met with Barack Obama at the White House and laid out his plans for renovations of the White House. What are your thoughts about him tearing it down to build a bigger, better White House?
You know, I think the country's in need of a change, and I'm open to any new, ideas.
Melania actually did this sketch. She was an architect back in Mongolia. What do you think when you see this, all the people gathered around the spire?
To me, that looks like a rendering of Mecca.
Do you like the idea of a White House food court?
No, not at all.
I like the guy. I'm for change. Just give it a shot. Thanks for inviting us into your home tonight. That's it for this special report. Fair, balanced, and unafraid. No online show this evening. Tucker Carlson tonight. Have you seen this show? It starts right now.